My name is Audrey, and at 29 years old, I thought I knew exactly what my wedding day would look like. Looking at these photos now, I still can't believe how one uninvited guest turned my perfect day into complete chaos. The betrayal didn't just come from my sister showing up in white. It came from discovering my parents had orchestrated the whole thing behind my back. Before I share what happened at my wedding, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit like and subscribe if you've ever dealt with family drama. Trust me, this story will make you rethink everything about family loyalty and what happens when toxic relatives push you too far. Growing up, Emma was everything my parents wanted in a daughter. 3 years older than me, she collected achievements like trophies. Straight A student, head cheerleader, prom queen, valedictorian. I was the quiet one who painted in her bedroom and wrote poetry nobody read. When Emma got her sweet 16, my parents rented out the country club downtown. 300 guests, a live band, and a car with a giant bow waiting in the driveway. When my 16th birthday came around, we had dinner at Olive Garden with just the family. Mom said they needed to be more careful with money that year, though somehow they found $50,000 for Emma's college tuition 6 months later. The pattern never changed. Emma would come home from university with stories about professors who adored her brilliance, while I worked 2 jobs to pay for community college classes. She'd laugh at family dinners about her adventures in Paris during study abroad, while I spent summers washing dishes at a local diner to afford textbooks. My parents would beam at her, then turn to me with that look of patient disappointment, like they were waiting for me to finally become someone worth celebrating. I thought things would change when I met Marcus during my junior year. He was different from the guys Emma usually stole from me. Quieter, more thoughtful, interested in my art and writing. We dated for 2 years, and for the first time I had something that was completely mine. We talked about moving to Portland after graduation, getting a tiny apartment building, a life away from my family's suffocating dynamics. He gave me a promise ring on our 2nd anniversary, nothing fancy, just a simple silver band with a small sapphire. I wore it like armor against my family's dismissive comments. That Thanksgiving, Emma came home from her marketing job in Chicago. She'd been dumped by her investment banker boyfriend and spent the entire dinner making snide comments about small-town relationships and people who peaked in college. Marcus invited her to join us for Black Friday shopping, trying to be nice to my family. I should have seen the way her eyes lit up when he smiled at her. I should have noticed how she suddenly became interested in everything he said, laughing too loud at his jokes, touching his arm when she talked. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, I decided to surprise Marcus with lunch at his apartment. His car was there, but he didn't answer my texts. I used the spare key he'd given me, walked up those familiar stairs, and heard her laugh before I even reached his door. That specific laugh she used when she was getting exactly what she wanted. I stood in his bedroom doorway for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, watching my sister and my boyfriend tangled in his sheets. Emma saw me first. She didn't even have the decency to look surprised. She just shrugged and said it just happened, like she was talking about accidentally eating the last cookie. Marcus tried to explain, stumbling over words about confusion and mistakes, and not meaning for this to happen. Emma got dressed slowly, deliberately, making sure I saw every moment of her claiming what had been mine. When I told my parents that evening, my mother's first words weren't comfort or outrage. She said I shouldn't ruin my sister's happiness over a boy. My father added that Emma was going through a tough time with her breakup, and I should be more understanding. That night, I packed everything I owned into my beat-up Honda Civic and drove to my friend Sarah's apartment. I didn't speak to any of them for 2 years. During those 2 years of silence, I rebuilt myself from scratch. I got a job at a marketing firm downtown, nothing glamorous, just entry-level work, but it was mine. I found a studio apartment above a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon rolls and fresh bread. I took pottery classes on weekends and sold my pieces at local craft fairs. Sarah introduced me to her cousin Daniel at a 4th of July barbecue, though romance was the last thing on my mind. Daniel worked as a software engineer at a tech startup, but what drew me to him wasn't his stable job or his genuine laugh. It was the way he listened when I finally told him about my family 3 months into our friendship. He didn't try to fix anything or convince me to forgive them. He just held my hand and said that chosen family was just as real as blood family, sometimes more so. We were friends for a full year before our first kiss, which happened accidentally during a horror movie marathon when I jumped into his arms during a particularly scary scene. We both laughed so hard we cried, then kissed again, this time on purpose. When Daniel proposed 2 years later, he did it quietly, privately, exactly how I needed it to be. No public spectacle, no family drama, just the two of us on a hiking trail we loved, autumn leaves falling around us like confetti. He'd chosen a ring that reminded him of my pottery glazes, unique swirls of blue and green in the stone. His proposal speech was about building a life where I never had to make myself smaller for anyone, where my art and my voice and my feelings mattered just as much as anyone else's. I said yes before he even finished talking. We decided on a small wedding immediately. 50 guests, maximum, only people who had shown up for us consistently. The list included Daniel's immediate family, our closest friends, some coworkers who'd become like family, and very selectively, a few relatives from my side who hadn't participated in the toxic dynamics. Emma's name never even came up in discussions. She wasn't part of my life anymore, and I wanted to keep it that way. When I called my parents to tell them about the engagement, my mother's first question was whether Emma would be in the wedding party. Not congratulations, not asking about Daniel, not expressing joy for my happiness, just immediately centering Emma in my moment. I told her calmly that Emma wasn't invited at all, and the silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then came the explosion of guilt and manipulation I'd been expecting. My mother cried about family appearances and what people would think. She brought up every sacrifice they'd ever made for me, conveniently forgetting how those sacrifices were pennies compared to what they'd given Emma. My father got on the phone to lecture me about forgiveness and moving forward, saying I was being childish and petty. He actually used the phrase, "blood is thicker than water," as if that blood hadn't been poisoned by years of favoritism and betrayal. I held firm, telling them they could either accept my decision or not come themselves. They chose to sulk for a week before calling back to grudgingly agree. The next few months brought wave after wave of pressure. My mother would call every Sunday with a new angle. One week, Emma was supposedly in therapy and had seen the error of her ways. The next week, she was deeply depressed and my cruelty was making it worse. Then came the stories about Emma's daughter, my 4-year-old niece I'd never met, who supposedly asked about her Aunt Audrey all the time. Each call ended with me repeating my boundary and my mother sighing dramatically, like I'd personally hammered nails into her hands. My extended family got pulled into the campaign. Aunt Martha called to say she understood my position, but wouldn't it be easier to just let Emma come? Uncle Robert sent a long email about the importance of family unity, clearly written by my mother but sent from his account. Even my grandmother, who I thought might understand, left a voicemail about how she might not live to see another family gathering. The emotional manipulation was so transparent, it might have been funny if it hadn't been so exhausting. Sarah helped me develop scripts for these conversations. We literally wrote them out and practiced them. I understand you feel that way, but my decision is final. I'm not discussing this further. If you can't respect my boundary, we'll need to end this conversation. Daniel started answering my phone when family members called politely but firmly, shutting down attempts to wear me down. He became my shield against the constant barrage of guilt and manipulation. 3 months before the wedding, something shifted. My parents suddenly became cooperative, almost supportive. They stopped mentioning Emma entirely and started asking normal questions about flowers and catering. My mother offered to help with addressing invitations. My father sent a check to help with expenses, no strings attached, or so he claimed. I should have been suspicious of the complete personality change, but I was so relieved to have peace that I ignored the red flags waving in my peripheral vision. Looking back, there were so many signs. My mother insisted on handling the family side RSVPs, saying she wanted to take something off my plate. She kept asking detailed questions about the seating chart, specifically about where extra tables could go if needed. My father randomly mentioned that the catering count should maybe be a little higher, just in case some people forgot to RSVP. He offered to pay for 20 extra plates, saying it was better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. The week before the wedding, my mother was constantly on her phone during the rehearsal dinner, stepping outside for hushed conversations. She claimed she was coordinating with the florist, but the florist later told me they hadn't spoken to her at all that week. My dad kept nervously checking his watch and mumbling about timing and schedules. My cousin Jenny started to say something about Emma at the rehearsal dinner, but her mother quickly shushed her. I was so focused on the wedding itself, on marrying Daniel and starting our life together, that I pushed aside the nagging feeling that something was being orchestrated behind my back. The morning of my wedding day started perfectly. October sunshine streamed through the windows of the bridal suite as my 3 bridesmaids and I sipped champagne and got our hair done. Sarah kept making jokes about finally getting me to wear a dress that wasn't covered in clay dust from my pottery work. My friend Lisa played our Getting Ready playlist, carefully curated to include 0 sad songs or anything that might bring up bad memories. The makeup artist worked her magic while we laughed about Daniel's bachelor party, where his friends had taken him to an escape room instead of a strip club because they knew him so well. My mother arrived late, flustered and constantly checking her phone. She claimed traffic was horrible, but the venue was only 20 minutes from her house with multiple routes available. She kept stepping into the hallway for phone calls, returning each time with a forced smile and comments about how beautiful everything looked. When the photographer asked for mother-daughter photos, she seemed distracted, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds, like she was waiting for something or someone. Sarah pulled me aside while I was putting on my dress. She'd noticed a car in the parking lot with Illinois plates, which was weird, since none of Daniel's family lived there. She also mentioned seeing my mother talking intensely with someone on the phone, saying something about timing and entrance. I brushed off her concerns, not wanting anything to ruin the happiness I'd worked so hard to protect. Sarah squeezed my hand and promised to keep an eye on things, her protective instincts fully activated. My father showed up just as we were about to leave for the ceremony. He looked guilty, avoiding direct eye contact and fumbling with his boutonniere. When I asked if everything was okay, he mumbled something about just being emotional about his little girl getting married. He'd never called me his little girl before, not once in 29 years. The phrase sat wrong in my stomach, but I pushed the feeling down. This was my wedding day. Nothing was going to ruin it. As I stood at the door of the ceremony space, waiting for the music to start, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Can't wait to see you," it said, followed by a heart emoji. My hands started shaking slightly, but Daniel's nephew, our ring bearer, grabbed my hand and smiled up at me with such pure joy that I forgot about the text. The music started, and I walked down that aisle lined with autumn flowers, focusing only on Daniel's face at the end of it. The ceremony was everything we'd planned. Daniel's vows made me cry when he promised to always be my soft place to land in a world that often felt too sharp. My vows to him included a line about choosing to build our own family, one based on respect and genuine love, rather than obligation. His mother wiped tears from her eyes. My side of the aisle was notably smaller than his, but the people there were the ones who mattered. Or so I thought, until I turned around after our first kiss as husband and wife and saw my parents' faces painted with guilt and anticipation rather than joy. The walk from the ceremony space to the reception hall took only 2 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another dimension. Daniel and I were supposed to enter to our chosen song, have our first dance, then sit down for toasts and dinner. We stood outside the doors, hands clasped, stealing one more kiss before entering. The coordinator counted down from 3, the doors opened, and my entire body froze. There at my parents' table sat Emma in a cream-colored dress that was basically white in the reception lighting, holding a glass of champagne and smirking like she'd won some kind of prize. Next to her sat a man I assumed was Todd, her husband I'd only heard about through family gossip. He looked uncomfortable, tugging at his collar and trying to manage their young daughter who was running around the table. Emma's dress wasn't just inappropriate in color. It was also cut lower than mine, tighter than mine, and she'd positioned herself at the table so she'd be directly in my line of sight from the head table. My parents suddenly became very interested in their napkins, unable to meet my eyes, as Daniel's hand tightened around mine, hard enough to hurt. Sarah appeared at my elbow within seconds, ready to handle whatever I needed. Other guests were starting to notice the tension whispers spreading through the room like wildfire. Daniel's brother stood up ready to escort Emma out if we gave the word. But Emma raised her champagne glass in a mock toast from across the room, that same smile she'd worn when she was walking out of Marcus's apartment, and I made a decision. If she wanted to play games at my wedding, I'd play too. But I'd make sure I won. I forced myself to smile and continue our entrance, Daniel following my lead, though I could feel the tension radiating from his body. We completed our first dance, though the song that was supposed to be romantic now felt like background music to a battle about to begin. As we swayed, Daniel whispered in my ear, asking if I wanted him to have security remove them. I told him no, let them stay. Emma had made a critical error in judgment coming here, and she was about to learn exactly how much I'd changed since she last saw me. During dinner, Emma made her presence aggressively known. She laughed too loudly at everything, her voice cutting through conversations at other tables. She kept getting up to mingle, approaching Daniel's family members to introduce herself as my beloved sister, who I'd cruelly excluded from the wedding party. She told my new mother-in-law about how close we'd been as children, painting a picture of sisterhood that had never existed. She even approached the band to request songs, trying to change our carefully planned playlist to music she knew I hated. I watched her performance from the head table, cataloging every move. She told Daniel's sweet aunt about the time I'd supposedly stolen her boyfriend in high school, completely reversing the actual story. She informed his cousins that I'd always been jealous of her success, which was rich coming from someone who'd been fired from 3 jobs in 5 years, according to family gossip. When she reached my coworker's table, she spun tales about my difficult personality and how patient she'd always been with me. Several guests looked increasingly uncomfortable, but my parents did nothing to stop her. The worst part was watching Todd, who clearly had no idea what was happening. He kept trying to coddle their daughter, apologizing to guests when the child knocked things over, while Emma ignored both of them completely. At one point, the little girl tried to show Emma a picture she'd drawn, and Emma brushed her off without even looking, too busy performing her show of false sisterhood. Todd's face grew darker with each dismissive gesture, and I realized he was seeing a side of his wife she'd probably kept hidden. When Emma started telling the groomsmen about how I'd been so desperate for male attention in college that I'd dated anyone who showed interest, Daniel's jaw clenched so hard I worried he'd crack a tooth. She was describing my relationship with Marcus without naming him, making it sound like I'd driven him away with clinginess and neediness. The truth was burning in my throat, begging to be released. Sarah kept shooting me looks, silently asking if I wanted her to intervene. But I waited, knowing Emma's ego would push her to go even further. As dinner wound down and the toast portion approached, Emma's wine consumption had reached a level where her words started slurring slightly. She wasn't falling down drunk, but she was loose enough that her filter had completely disappeared. She cornered the photographer, insisting on being in photos she hadn't been invited to join. She tried to give the videographer a message for the wedding video about how much she loved her baby sister despite everything. The everything hung in the air like a threat, undefined but ominous. My mother finally attempted damage control, trying to guide Emma back to their table, but Emma shook her off dramatically. She announced loudly that she had something important to say, and nobody was going to stop her from saying it. My father buried his face in his hands. Todd looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Their daughter had finally exhausted herself and fallen asleep in her chair, mirthfully unconscious for what was about to happen. The best man had just finished his sweet, funny toast about Daniel being hopeless with women until he met me. The maid of honor, Sarah, had given a beautiful speech about chosen family and finding people who see your true worth. There was supposed to be a brief break before dinner service continued, but Emma stood up, grabbed a microphone from the bandstand before anyone could stop her, and tapped it loudly to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Emma stood there in her almost white dress, swaying slightly, holding that microphone like a weapon. She cleared her throat dramatically and began with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let me tell you all about my baby sister, Audrey." She started, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We've been through so much together, haven't we, Audrey? So many shared experiences, so many memories, some that she probably wishes she could forget. She launched into story after story, each one carefully crafted to humiliate me while maintaining plausible deniability about her cruelty. There was the time I'd apparently copied her style in high school, trying desperately to be like her. The reality was, she'd thrown a fit when I wore a similar sweater once, screaming that I was trying to steal her identity. She told everyone about my awkward phase, complete with braces and acne, making it sound like it lasted years when it was maybe 6 months. She described my early artwork as adorable attempts to be creative, dismissing years of dedication and growth as childish dabbling. The worst part was how she portrayed our relationship with men. According to Emma, I'd always been insecure about boys following her around at parties, hoping to catch the attention of whoever was interested in her. She said she'd tried to help me, even setting me up with guys she'd already dated, as if she was doing me favors by passing along her leftovers. She actually used the phrase sloppy seconds while looking directly at Daniel, implying he was just another in a long line of men who'd chosen me only after being rejected by her. Then came the comment about testing my boyfriends. "You see," Emma said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass, "I always made sure Audrey's boyfriends were good enough for her. Some passed the test, some didn't. Marcus, for example, definitely didn't pass." The way she said his name possessively intimately made my skin crawl. She went on to describe how easy it had been to prove he wasn't worthy of me, how quickly he'd forgotten I existed when presented with a better option. She painted herself as my protector while describing my deepest betrayal. The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of shifting uncomfortable guests. Daniel's parents looked horrified. My coworkers were exchanging shocked glances. Sarah had half risen from her chair, ready to physically tackle Emma if necessary. But Emma wasn't done. She turned to Daniel, directly raising her glass in his direction. "You're a brave man, Daniel," she slurred. "Taking on a project like my sister. She's always been a work in progress, haven't you, Audrey? Always trying so hard to be enough." She listed my supposed failures like a grocery list. Never quite pretty enough. Never quite smart enough. Never quite successful enough. She mentioned my community college education versus her university degree, my studio apartment above the bakery versus her suburban house, my pottery hobby versus her corporate career. She actually said that at least I'd finally accomplished something by landing a man with a steady job, as if Daniel was a lottery ticket I'd somehow stolen rather than a partner who chose me. The microphone started feeding back a high-pitched whine that matched the noise in my head. Emma tried to adjust it, stumbling slightly in her heels. "Some of us are just meant to be wives and mothers," she continued, looking at Todd with what she probably thought was affection, but came across as dismissive ownership. "Others need more time to figure things out. Maybe by your 40th birthday, Audrey, you'll finally know who you are." She raised her glass for a toast that nobody joined, the champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim. I stood up slowly, my movement drawing every eye in the room. Sarah later told me I looked completely calm, almost serene, but inside I was experiencing a moment of perfect clarity. Every year of abuse, dismissal, and betrayal crystallized into pure determination. I walked to Emma with measured steps, took the microphone from her unresisting hand, and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been storing ammunition for years and finally had permission to use it. "Since we're sharing family stories," I began, my voice steady and clear, "let me tell you about real sisterhood. Let me tell you about a sister who seduced my college boyfriend while she was engaged to Todd. Yes, Todd, the man sitting right there looking like he's going to be sick. She slept with Marcus multiple times during Thanksgiving week 5 years ago in his apartment, in the bed where I'd spent countless nights planning our future. She told me afterward that it was for my own good to prove he wasn't worthy. But the truth is, Emma can't stand anyone else having something she doesn't." Todd's face had gone from confused to devastated in seconds. He looked at Emma, who was trying to grab the microphone back, her composed mask finally cracking. But I wasn't done. I turned to address the room, making eye contact with as many guests as possible. Would you like to know about the married professor she had an affair with in college, Professor Matthews, who lost his tenure and his marriage when it came out? Or should I tell you about her boss at her first job whose wife was 6 months pregnant when Emma decided she deserved him more? Emma lunged for the microphone, but Daniel's brother stood up, creating a barrier between us. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. How about the neighbor from last year, Todd? The one she told you was helping her with yard work. They weren't working on the garden. She was sneaking into his house every Tuesday while you were at work, and your daughter was at preschool. His wife found them together, which is why that family moved so suddenly. Emma doesn't believe in boundaries, especially not the sacred ones like marriage or sisterhood. The room erupted. Todd stood up so fast his chair fell backward, his face cycling through denial, rage, and heartbreak. Their daughter woke up crying, confused by the sudden noise. My mother was sobbing, my father trying to calm everyone down, but the damage was done. Emma tried to deny it, then switched to attacking me, then finally admitted everything in a screaming tirade about how I'd always been jealous and vindictive. She actually tried to flip the narrative one more time, claiming I'd seduced Marcus first, and she was getting revenge, but even she knew nobody was buying it anymore. I set the microphone down gently on the gift table and walked back to Daniel, who stood and took my hand. Together we walked out of our own reception, leaving the chaos behind. The last thing I heard was Todd telling Emma he was taking their daughter and leaving, that his lawyer would be in contact, that she'd never see either of them again without a court order. The sound of her screaming my name followed us into the parking lot, but I didn't look back. Sarah and Daniel's brother appeared within minutes, having grabbed our essential items from the chaos inside. The four of us stood in the parking lot, autumn air cooling my burning face, processing what had just happened. Then Daniel started laughing, not mockingly, but with genuine release, and suddenly we were all laughing and crying simultaneously. My wedding reception had turned into a disaster movie, but somehow I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth was finally outspoken in front of witnesses who could never let my family pretend otherwise. We went back inside after Emma had been removed. Security had to physically escort her to the parking lot while she screamed threats and obscenities. Todd had already left with their daughter, his best man helping him carry the sleeping child to the car. My parents tried to approach me, my mother wailing about family destruction, and my father accusing me of cruel timing. I told them simply that they'd made their choice when they secretly invited Emma, and now they could live with the consequences. They left shortly after my mother supported between my father and uncle. The remaining guests gave us a standing ovation when we re-entered. Daniel's family surrounded us with support and congratulations for standing up to such toxic behavior. My Aunt Martha, who'd been pressured to convince me to invite Emma, hugged me and whispered that she'd been waiting years for someone to expose Emma's affairs. Apparently everyone in the extended family knew about at least some of Emma's betrayals, but had been too afraid of rocking the boat to say anything. The culture of enabling had finally been shattered. We actually had a wonderful rest of the evening. The DJ played all our favorite songs, the ones Emma had tried to change. Daniel's grandmother made a beautiful impromptu toast about choosing courage over comfortable lies. My coworkers formed a protective circle on the dance floor, turning what could have been awkward into a celebration of authenticity. The photographer later told me the genuine joy in the after photos was more beautiful than anything staged could have been. Daniel and I had our last dance to our original song choice, swaying together, while our real friends and chosen family watched with genuine love. He whispered in my ear that he'd never been prouder of anyone in his life, that watching me stand up to Emma was like watching a butterfly emerge from a chrysalis. We cut the cake, feeding each other with laughter instead of the tension from earlier. The night ended with sparklers and hugs, everyone telling us this was the most memorable wedding they'd ever attended. The next morning, my phone had over 50 missed calls from Emma and 30 from my parents. I blocked all their numbers before listening to a single voicemail. Todd had sent one message through social media thanking me for finally revealing the truth he'd suspected but couldn't prove. He was filing for divorce and custody, immediately had already contacted a lawyer, and had evidence of Emma's latest affair that he'd been gathering. He apologized for his daughter's presence at the chaos and promised to explain everything age-appropriately when she was older. The social media explosion was immediate and dramatic. Family members who'd stayed silent for years began sharing their own Emma stories. Apparently, she'd borrowed money from numerous relatives and never paid it back. She'd shown up to other family events in white trying to upstage brides. She'd spread rumors about cousins who achieved things she hadn't. The pattern of destruction went back decades, enabled by parents who refused to see their golden child's tarnished reality. Within a week, Emma's carefully constructed life had completely collapsed. Her employer found out about the office affairs through the social media storm and launched an investigation. She was fired for inappropriate conduct and violation of company policy. Todd's divorce lawyer was aggressive, using the public admission of multiple affairs to push for full custody and minimal alimony. Emma went from suburban housewife with a perfect image to unemployed, divorced, and living in my parents' basement within a month. My parents tried everything to get me to talk to them. They sent flying monkeys in the form of various relatives, all of whom I politely but firmly turned away. They wrote letters claiming Emma was suicidal, and it was my fault, though. Cousin Jenny confirmed Emma was actually just angry and plotting revenge. They even showed up at my work, causing such a scene that security had to escort them out, and I got permission to work from home for a while. Their desperation only reinforced that I'd made the right decision. The honeymoon Daniel and I took to Costa Rica became more than just a celebration of our marriage. It was a detoxification from years of toxic family dynamics. We spent long morning walks on the beach, talking through everything, not just the wedding drama, but the years of conditioning that had made me accept such treatment for so long. Daniel listened without judgment as I unpacked memories I'd buried, patterns I was only now recognizing. He shared his own family struggles, smaller but still valid, and we bonded over choosing to break cycles rather than perpetuate them. When we returned home, I started therapy with someone who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. The therapist helped me understand that Emma likely had narcissistic personality disorder, enabled and encouraged by parents who couldn't face their own failures. Every story from childhood looked different through this lens. The favoritism wasn't random. It was my parents living through Emma's achievements while using me as the scapegoat for their disappointments. Understanding didn't excuse their behavior, but it helped me stop blaming myself. 6 months after the wedding, I received a letter from Todd's lawyer. Emma was trying to claim alienation of affection, saying I'd deliberately destroyed her marriage. The lawyer assured me the case was baseless, especially since Todd had evidence of affairs predating my wedding revelation. But the letter also contained something unexpected. Todd wanted to arrange for me to meet my niece, believing she deserved to know her aunt, who'd indirectly saved her from growing up with Emma's toxic influence full-time. Meeting my 4-year-old niece Lily was bittersweet. She looked so much like Emma at that age before the cruelty set in, all blonde curls and bright curiosity. Todd had full custody, with Emma getting supervised visitation every other weekend. He told me Emma spent those visits on her phone, barely interacting with Lily unless someone was watching. The court-appointed supervisor had already noted concerning patterns of neglect and emotional manipulation. It broke my heart but strengthened my resolve that I'd done the right thing. My career flourished without the constant emotional drain of family drama. The pottery I'd been creating as a hobby started selling at higher-end galleries. A local magazine did a feature on my work, focusing on pieces inspired by breaking free from generational trauma. The irony wasn't lost on me that finding my voice artistically came from finally speaking my truth publicly. Daniel's support never wavered, attending every show, helping me load kilns, celebrating each small victory as if it were a major achievement. A year after the wedding, I learned through Jenny that Emma had started therapy not by choice, but court-ordered for her custody arrangement. My parents had sold their house to pay for her legal bills, and their own downsizing, finally facing financial consequences for their enabling. They'd stopped trying to contact me directly, though my mother still sent birthday and Christmas cards I returned unopened. The family divide had solidified, with relatives either supporting my boundaries or choosing their side. I was fine with the smaller family circle. Daniel's family became my true family in every way that mattered. His mother taught me family recipes, while sharing stories of her own difficult sister. His father included me in their family business discussions, valuing my input in ways my own father never had. His siblings invited us to everything, making sure I never felt excluded or less than. They showed me what healthy family dynamics looked like, where love didn't require competition or comparison, where support wasn't conditional on achievement. 2 years after the wedding, Daniel and I bought our first house, a fixer-upper we renovated together. While stripping wallpaper in what would become my studio, we found old newspaper from the 1950s with an advice column about family troubles. The columnist recommended forgiveness at all costs, keeping family secrets, maintaining appearances above all else. We framed it as a reminder of how far we'd come, how different our values were from those destructive traditions. The pottery studio I built in our garage became my sanctuary. I started teaching classes to other survivors of family trauma, creating art from pain, beauty, from broken things. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was powerful. My students often cried during classes not from sadness, but from recognition and release. We formed a support group that met monthly, sharing stories and strategies for maintaining boundaries with toxic families. Emma and my parents became cautionary tales that helped others feel less alone. 3 years after the wedding, I received a message from Emma through a mutual acquaintance. She wanted to apologize, claimed she'd changed, understood now what she'd done wrong. The message was full of therapy speak, but lacked genuine accountability. She still positioned herself as a victim of circumstances of mental illness, of my parents' enabling of everything except her own choices. I didn't respond. Apologies without changed behavior are just manipulation tactics, and I'd learned to recognize those from miles away. Life wasn't perfect without them, but it was peaceful. Daniel and I had disagreements that we resolved through actual communication instead of manipulation and guilt. We spent holidays with chosen family who showed up consistently, who celebrated our successes without jealousy, who supported us through challenges without keeping score. The family we were building together, starting with just the two of us, was based on respect and genuine love, rather than obligation and performance. Sometimes I'd see families in public that reminded me of what I'd lost, or rather what I'd never actually had. Parents treating their children equally, siblings supporting each other genuinely. Grandparents who didn't play favorites. The grief would hit unexpectedly, not for my actual family, but for the fantasy family I'd spent years trying to make real. Daniel would recognize the look on my face and hold my hand, reminding me without words that I was loved exactly as I was. Today, 5 years after that chaotic wedding, I can look at the photos without anger. The image of Emma in her white dress at my parents' table serves as a reminder of the moment I chose myself over their dysfunction. The picture of me holding the microphone, truth spilling out like water breaking through a dam, represents the birth of my authentic self. The final shots of the evening, surrounded by people who truly loved us, show what family actually looks like when it's healthy. My story isn't unique, though the wedding drama might be more theatrical than most. Every day, people struggle with toxic families who demand forgiveness without accountability, who weaponize love to maintain control, who create scapegoats and golden children to avoid examining their own failures. Every day, someone stands up like I did and says, "Enough, no more, this ends with me." It's terrifying and liberating and necessary. Blood might be thicker than water, but poison is thicker than both, and sometimes the only way to survive is to stop drinking from contaminated wells. I still make pottery, still teach classes, still live my life openly and honestly. Emma occasionally surfaces in family gossip, apparently moving from relationship to relationship, job to job, always leaving destruction in her wake. My parents aged rapidly under the weight of their choices, clinging to their narrative that I destroyed the family rather than accepting their role in its dysfunction. Todd remarried a wonderful woman who loves Lily like her own, providing the stable maternal figure Emma never could be. The lesson isn't about revenge or public humiliation, though I won't lie and say, there wasn't satisfaction in that moment of truth-telling. The lesson is about the freedom that comes from refusing to keep secrets that protect abusers and enable dysfunction. It's about choosing your own peace over their comfort, your truth over their lies, your future over their past. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who share your DNA, but not your values. If you're watching this and struggling with your own toxic family dynamics, wondering if you're overreacting or being too sensitive, let me tell you what my therapist told me. If you have to make yourself smaller to fit into your family, you're in the wrong family. If speaking your truth is considered betrayal, then their love comes with terms and conditions that violate your basic dignity. You deserve relationships where honesty is welcomed, where boundaries are respected, where love doesn't require you to sacrifice your self-worth. That wedding, as chaotic as it was, gave me the greatest gift possible. It showed everyone exactly who Emma and my parents really were, removing their masks in front of witnesses who couldn't be gaslit into forgetting. It freed me from decades of doubt about whether I was the problem. Most importantly, it taught me that sometimes the best way to honor yourself is to stop protecting people who consistently dishonor you. Family is who shows up for you consistently, who celebrates your joy without jealousy, who supports you without keeping score. Family is Daniel holding my hand through therapy sessions, Sarah checking in years after the drama, Todd protecting Lily from repeating toxic patterns. Family is my pottery students who understand survival, my chosen siblings who know my worth, my new parents who love me without conditions. Family is what you build after you leave the burning house, not the arsonists who lit the match. The wedding photos sit in our album now, a complete story from hope to chaos to liberation. Friends who visit always want to hear about it, fascinated by the drama, but missing the deeper meaning. It wasn't about Emma wearing white or making cruel toasts. It was about the moment I decided my voice mattered more than their comfort, my truth more than their facade, my future more than their past. Every bride should be so lucky to have such clarity on their wedding day, though I hope yours comes with less property damage and more actual dancing. I want to leave you with this thought as you consider your own family dynamics and boundaries. You are not obligated to keep secrets that protect people who hurt you. You are not required to forgive without accountability or change. You are not responsible for managing other people's emotions about your truth. You are allowed to choose peace over family, health over history, growth over guilt. Your wedding, your birthday, your life, your rules. Anyone who can't respect that doesn't deserve a seat at your table, no matter how much DNA you share. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family members at a major event? How do you maintain boundaries with people who believe blood relation means unlimited access to your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about breaking free from toxic patterns. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their boundaries are valid and their peace matters more than keeping toxic peace. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the family you choose is often more real than the one you're born into. May you find the courage to choose yourself always.